Teachers of Reddit, how easy is it to tell if a student has a crush on another? And what is the funniest/saddest moment between the two you can share? Depends on the age, but the signs are obvious as hell. Lots of staring, and not so obvious, but very obvious attempts at being near them. Visible disappointment when they aren't put in the same group for group work. Jealousy in all forms. I've seen a kid hate a classmate for weeks because that classmate sat next to the kid's crush for morning meeting. Super obvious. When a girl says, "Stop, while laughing at a guy who is teasing her, or a guy goes out of his way to make fun of her/steal something from her, so she'll have to pursue him to get it back, it makes me 100% certain. Shout out to my high school econ teacher for noticing that me and a girl were into each other. Constantly putting us in the same group. Straight up asking the girl if she had a boyfriend while I was in the room. Mrs. Anderson is the best wingman of all time. In middle school, they just start trying to get on each other's nerves more, and are usually overly smiley. The main problem comes when only one of them is smiley. I once had a teacher tell me that my crush and I worked together well, and used him and I as an example for something. We ended up together, and she said, I so predicted it. Seeing the reaction on her face was priceless, and I'll never forget it. So, apparently we were very obvious. Everything with students is obvious. I know who you have a crush on. I know when you and your friend got in a fight and aren't the same today. I know when you are having a bad week. I know when you've lost motivation. I know when you're looking for attention, and I know when you want to be left alone. Some teachers use this information to make informed decisions, like sitting you next to your crush, cutting you slack that day, asking if everything is alright, etc. But I've seen some use it to be unfair to students. High school teacher. Depending on the kids' personalities, they either get louder or quieter when their crushes are present. The loud ones are freaking annoying. The quiet ones are the ones I would purposefully sit next to their crushes, haha. Teenagers are not subtle by nature, but they are amazingly oblivious when it comes to matters of the heart. They are really perceptive with other things though. The boys almost never recognize if a girl likes them, and the girls never realize a guy is showing interest. It's funny to watch it happen. It's so blatantly obvious as an outsider, but I remember being just as oblivious as a student. It's called crushing self-doubt. I had a girl literally ask me out, and I slept on it and convinced myself she was just ducking with me in an attempt to embarrass me. My son who is 5 has a crush on a 6-year-old at his school. She says she loves him too, and she is around him all the time. He told me just yesterday that he wants to build a 3-bedroom house, with a room for him, a room for her, and a room for the baby they are going to have. I asked if he did not want to share a bedroom with her, and he said a boy needs his space. Former 6th grade teacher here. I was there to witness one of my kids take his first big leap. At lunch, he asked the girl he had a crush on, "Will you go on a date with me?" She smiled and said yes. Immediately the boy on the other side of her said, "Don't go out with this ducker, go out with me." She smiled and said okay. Middle school is tough, man. This is one of my most treasured memories as a teacher. I was a student teacher, so I was not prepared for this. I asked my students to write and share their own poetry. We focused on sensory imagery, and I had the presentation staged at the local university for a bit more gravitas. Some were funny, some were surprisingly beautiful, but most were banal, and the exercise was mostly boring. This one girl got up in front of the class visibly shaking. She was near tears for her entire poem. I wanted to help her, but I had no idea what to do, so I just watched like everyone else, as she poured her heart out to a boy in the class who did not reciprocate. When she finished, there was a silence in the room, and after a few seconds, which seemed to stretch out forever, one of her friends stood up and ushered her out of class, as the tears began to flow. Nobody made fun of her, but the boy also didn't show that he felt the same. It was just out there with no commentary. It is to this day, one of the bravest acts I have ever witnessed. That girl has taken one of the biggest emotional steps one can take. I hope she's a stronger person now because of it. I can definitely tell and I always sit the awkward shy ones with their crushes. Some would call me a guardian angel. And others, namely the awkward shy ones, would call you Satan. I teach preschool. They tend to lack any sort of filter, so they'll just say it outright. Sometimes to me, sometimes to their crush. Matthew is my boyfriend. Or, let's get married, Julia. They will also occasionally try to kiss their crush. Today, one of my students, Gavin, kissed my hand and proposed. He's 4. It was adorable. I almost wish adult men were as upfront, although I think I'd be a bit freaked out with a proposal. Little kids. No shame or game. I have this one teacher that will totally just say anything that's on her mind. One day she just flat out said, "Do you guys like each other or what?" to these 2 kids in my class. Within 3 days they were dating, and still are. That could have easily resulted in them being super embarrassed and avoiding each other forever. It is painfully obvious most of the time. Here are some of the things I saw. Continuous glances at the same person. Body language that positions a person closer to the other person. Interjecting into a conversation that the person was not engaged in to begin with. Being helpful more so for a person than for anyone else in class. Flirting obviously. Boastful storytelling. A lot of times it is outlandish and very obviously untrue. Hanging around the other person uninvited. And checking out the other person while oblivious to their surroundings. What is funny is that most people think they are being sneaky or inconspicuous. From my vantage point in the front of the classroom, these things seemed so obvious as to be genuinely painful to observe. It was especially painful when the feelings were intentionally unreciprocated. I taught college for a bit. Oh man, the longing stares across the room. The almost creepy wistful what ifs you can just see in their eyes. When I was in middle school, that was me. I'm a bartender, and this sounds like every guy in the bar after 1:30 AM. I'm a substitute teacher, and my favorite student with a blatant crush experience was with a 2nd grade class. I picked the kids up from the yard after recess, and a boy came to me very upset because one of the girls had been chasing him the entire recess. Once we got back to class, I talked with the girl, asking for her side of the story. Conversation went something like this. Me, Jose, was pretty upset about something that happened this recess. Do you want to tell me what happened? Girl, we were playing. Me, he said you were chasing him, is that true? Girl, slight blush, yeah. Me, do you think he wanted you to be chasing him? Girl, no. Me, if you knew he didn't want to be chased, why were you chasing him? Girl, huge blush, guilty smile, and hunched shoulders. He makes me laugh. Computer science / computational physics university lecturer here. Men tend to outnumber women 10 to 1 in my lecture groups. This has resulted in some odd scenarios, my favorite being 4 of my students simultaneously being exceedingly into the same exceedingly pretty woman, who was in the realms of shy but unremittingly kind. She also happened to be a lesbian. I knew this, they did not. Of course, only 2 people could sit next to her in a lecture theater, and an actual friend of hers usually took one of those spots. So the 4 of them would try to play it cool as she sat down, then desperately try to get as close as possible without giving the game away, like a single round of musical chairs where only one person can win, but there's definitely never going to be a prize any of the players want. It's important to also be aware that these were nerds of the highest order, so at a certain point they were just running and shoving one another, charging down the aisle like the adults they apparently were. I was eventually forced to intervene and end the game, when one of them honest to God vaulted a row of seats and nearly landed on another student. They deliberately avoided her after I pulled them aside, which was probably great for her, but terrible for me. I found their fruitless game a never-ending source of comedy. Miguel asked me, the AP Chem teacher, if he could write a message on the board for Mariella. Miguel was a former AP student, and at that time a senior. Mariella was a current AP student, and at the time a junior. Miguel, using elements from the periodic table, asked Mariella to go to the senior banquet, the biggest to do at our school. And then Miguel asked if I would record it on my phone while he asks her. I said sure thing. and I was glad to help. Both were great people and good students. Miguel, during class, goes into this big long show asking Mariella. After he's done, Mariella stands up, looks straight at the phone and says, "No." She then sat back down. Before this started, I thought there was no way Miguel would endure public humiliation, unless he knew for sure Mariella would say yes. As soon as she said no, there was nothing but silence. Miguel literally dropped his head and slinked out of the room. Mariella didn't flinch. I die laughing every time I watch that video. Greatest moment of my teaching career. There's a boy in my class whose voice hasn't changed yet. But every time he is talking to another girl, from a different class, he is noticeably lowering his voice to sound deeper. Obvious signs are obvious. What's even more obvious is when one has a crush and the other isn't interested. I'm speaking strictly from the demographic from my own school I taught at, so I hope it's clear I'm not generalizing all teenagers here. But I've noticed when a girl is crushing and the guy isn't, he is more likely, but not always, to be more forward about telling her so, to the point, in 1 or 2 cases, of sometimes being openly cruel to her. The girls in the reverse situation act annoyed, and will sometimes make their disinterest clear, but more often than not they grin and bear it, and try to pretend the crush doesn't exist. That's all I've got. I was there 4 months. I remember one time during an 8th grade field day, hearing a bit of an altercation between a few kids. When I went over there, I saw that this one very nerdy kid was chasing another boy around the football field, while a few other boys laughed, and a girl was telling them to stop. Turns out what happened was that one of those boys was teasing the girl, like that kind of stupid teasing 8th grade boys do to girls they like, and that the nerdy kid, who also seemed to have a crush on this girl, stood up to the boy to defend her honor, and wanted to fight him. So instead of fighting, the boy ran in circles while the nerdy kid chased him, furious and red in the face. It was very cringy. I got the vibe that the girl didn't mind the teasing from that boy, and that the nerdy kid's crush was probably not reciprocated. I broke up the fight, partly because I wanted to save the nerdy kid from his 8th grade self. I think most of us have been in a situation as a teenager where we try to impress someone who doesn't feel the same way. I didn't want him to look back years later and be even more embarrassed by it had it gone on longer. I teach 10th graders. When I was student teaching at age 21, I was really well liked, and the students told me a lot of personal stuff, probably because my age made me more approachable to 15-16-year-olds. One girl, C, would spend her study hall in my classroom during my planning period, along with about 5 other students who just wanted to get out of study hall. She told me that she liked a boy, S, who also hung out in my classroom at that time. From then on, I used to group them together in class on purpose to get her to talk to him, and give them an opportunity to spend some time together. I would always encourage her to ask him to hang out, or tell her about things he was interested in, so she could start conversations with him about it. She loved him. I think he saw her as a friend, but was generally clueless about her feelings. The saddest moment between the two of them was during my planning period, their study hall. Some of the other kids that hung out in my room during that time were off running errands for me, so it was just C, S, and I in the classroom. C was a pretty overweight girl, and she was sitting on the desk part of those dumb classroom desks, and the desk completely gave out, breaking and sending her falling to the ground. I immediately shoot S out of the room, sending him to get the maintenance guy to get the desk out. When S was gone, C started bawling and was absolutely mortified. I knew she would be, which is why I sent S away quickly. I talked her through her embarrassment, and by the time S got back, C was cool as a ducking cucumber and totally brushed it off. We went back to normal conversation, and I'm sure S forgot about it within minutes. My student teaching ended about a month later, so I'm not sure if anything became of C and S, but I definitely still think about them sometimes. I wasn't a teacher, I was a teaching helper. I mean, it was only 6th grade, but it was extremely easy. Looking at everyone facing you, you start to realize what people are focusing on. I know when kids are texting, because they look straight at me, and every 2 minutes look down for 2 seconds and have their hands under the table. For a crush, It is the long stares at the back of their crush's head whilst fiddling with an object like a pencil or their hair. Then the quick look away when the crush looks at them. It's easy. Sorry for question mark at first. I'm German and didn't know how to teaching helper correctly to say it. If anyone knows, please comment or message me. Teacher of high school freshman here. It's very easy. Saddest story? 2 houses, both alike. Sorry. It was a couple years ago. Girl was quiet, charming, and very bright. Boy was disruptive, but the good kind of disruptive. The pleasure to have in class disruptive. Very funny. It became very clear to me that she was crushing on him something fierce. I, for what it was worth, blessed this potential union. This went on for several months. Then, one day, she storms into my room in a huff, declaring her anger at him. As I'm going around the room later that day, I catch him writing a lengthy letter to her. At a glance, it explained how he thought she was a really nice girl and all, but it would be perhaps best if they remained only friends. I assume she had made a move. It didn't pay off. Over the next few days, I saw more mournful and longing looks than I ever wanted. Each one broke my heart. By the end of the year, they had patched it up, yet, I still caught the occasional twinge of sadness in her eye. She may still hope to this day. And I still hope too.